Good evening. An Odd Boy, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Part 1. December 1957 to June 1959. Alice in Wonderland. Scent of wild strawberries. Grasshoppers performing arpeggios on the unripened wheat husks of their legs. Sunflowers gazing down with undisguised curiosity in an acre of garden, emboldened by handsome chestnut trees. Alice and I played there all day in the summers. It was almost as much my home as hers. My father didn't mind me being away for unusual stretches of time, as I wouldn't be making a nuisance of myself in his vicinity. Alice and I would often wander in Wayflood woods. There was a small meadow, a short walk through the trees, across the river Wayflood. We imagined no one else knew that it was there. The Wayflood is called a river, but it's no more than a stream. We could jump it with ease at the age of 5. We'd sit in our mystery meadow, wordlessly observing butterflies. There were an inordinate number of butterflies in the late 1950s. Red admirals, purple emperors, green hair streaks, peacocks, tortoiseshells, green fritillaries, painted ladies, cabbage whites, brimstones, meadow browns, swallowtails, small heaths, Adonis blues, and all kinds of skippers. An extravaganza surpassing the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album sleeve. We felt it cruel to try to catch them, as they were too easily damaged. We found, if we sat still, and if we were absolutely quiet, they'd come near and flitter around us. The meadow was a visually fascinating space in which light emanated upward. The colours were unusually vivid. We enjoyed watching the changing shades of green in the grass far more than television. There was a pond which teemed with tadpoles in the spring, and we watched as they slowly turned into frogs. There were newts too, and once we saw a greater crested newt, resplendent with a fire-freckled belly. Alice Trevelyan was my early childhood companion and my future wife. We made that decision as 5-year-olds during the Yuletide of 1957, as snow drifted out of the deep grey, making marvellous maleescent mystery of the world. Who needs sunshine when the sunshine of your love lives a short walk away? Alice and I arranged our wedding celebrations in detail. The marriage of Alice Rosalind Trevelyan and Victor Howard Simerson would be followed by a grand reception, at which several different courses of ice cream would be served with a selection of delicious berries. Each guest would create a collage to be displayed in the reception hall. I was to wear white. Alice had seen a man dressed in white in a film. She'd liked it. The film was probably The Man in the White Suit, a satirical comedy starring Sir Alec Guinness. Alice was going to dress in green. She'd have a long velvet cape and a hat like Robin Hood's, adorned with a long pheasant feather. Alice agreed that marriage was the only sensible course of action, because we were obviously made for each other. We never had an ill-tempered word. We agreed on everything. Whatever childish greed and willfulness existed in us must have been sublimated. Kindness and generosity could only be met in equal measure. We were just as we seemed to each other, however we were elsewhere. Once we'd agreed on marriage, Alice said, "Now you should kiss me." I felt slightly nervous about that, alluring though the prospect was. "Don't we have to be married first?" I asked, hoping she would know the answer, and that it would be no. My father had expressed such outrage if anyone kissed on television, no matter how briefly, that I'd come to think that it was a highly shocking activity. Alice laughed. "Of course not. It's just babies that come after you're married. Didn't you know that?" Well, no, I had no idea. So I leant forward and kissed her. "Can I kiss you every day?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "every day forever." Alice lived in a large late Georgian house in Wayflod. It was one of two houses on an unmade cul-de-sac leading into Wayflod Woods. Their garden had two entrances from the cul-de-sac. The entrance closest to the house was the drive, and her parents' two cars often stood there. I don't know what kind of cars, but they were much larger than our family car. They had leather seats and walnut dashboards. They had a good smell to them. Her father's car was deep grey and had shiny dials on the dash, and I liked the look of them excessively. They looked like the dials you'd find in the cockpit of an aeroplane. I'd seen a film about World War II, The Dam Busters, and the aeroplanes had instruments like that. I think one of them must have been a rev counter, unknown on most family cars until the late 80s, so I imagine that Alice's family must have been relatively affluent. Mr. Trevelyan got us a book about butterflies so that we could identify them. There were caterpillar and chrysalis times too. It was miraculous that such creatures existed, and we were entranced by their colours. It seemed entirely curious that this life was just happening for no evident reason. It made us think that there was no evident reason for us either. We were just there, and all those colours and shapes were just there too. Adults generally didn't see themselves as colours and shapes. They took themselves very seriously as fundamentally different from caterpillars, chrysalises, or butterflies. One day we saw a shrew sitting by the side of the Wayflod washing its whiskers. Alice said, "It's the loveliest creature I've ever seen." I agreed, but secretly noted that Alice was lovelier by far. Just looking at Alice made me smile. She was the cleverest, most beautiful girl in the world. We wished we could talk with animals in order to ask them what the world looked like being so small or flying or burrowing or whatever. Animals were fantastic, and they were free. They didn't have to obey laws of any kind. There was no church, school, overbearing parents or police to force them to do anything they didn't want to do. Some of them ate each other, that was true, but then some people ate each other. Apart from the chance of being eaten, being an animal seemed a good situation. Being eaten hardly seemed a bigger risk than being killed in a war, and human beings were having wars all the time. Huge, horrible wars happened. Thousands of people died for no intelligible reason. The worst thing was that you'd be killed whether you wanted to be part of the war or not. At least animals could run away or hide from wars. In human life, people killed each other even when wars weren't going on. It occurred to me that our supposed superiority made little difference. We were supposed to have intelligence and civilization, and animals were supposed to be the lower order. I didn't see it like that. The whole thing made no sense. I thought that if we lived as animals lived, there'd be far fewer problems in the world. Alice thought I was right, and that this was a really interesting idea. The next time I saw Alice, she told me she'd told her parents about my idea. I went cold. I asked her, anxiously, what they'd said. I was utterly surprised when I heard her answer. My parents said you were a most unusual boy, and it was remarkable thinking for your age. They had told Alice that people could be civilized, however, and that those human beings who were truly civilized were trying to make the world a better place. They hoped that we would be people who would try to make the world a better place. I couldn't imagine my father reacting in that way. That I was capable of remarkable thinking was somehow perplexing. It was perplexing for two reasons. Firstly, I was not sure what remarkable meant. Alice thought it meant something good and clever, and I was relieved about that. Secondly, I was confused as to why the Trevelyan's thought I was clever, while my father thought of me as an idiot. Alice laughed at that and said, "The answer is as plain as your nose. Your father is the idiot." I was a little stunned, mainly because she thought it was so obvious. It was queer to feel ever so slightly defensive of my father, but I didn't let it trouble me for more than a few moments. It was better to accept her parents' view of me than the one my father espoused. Alice told me that her parents thought my father was just a little old-fashioned. He was quite old to have a son my age, and he probably wasn't always quite as patient as he could be. I was amazed that Alice had actual conversations with her parents, and that they told her what they thought about the world and the people they knew. My parents never discussed anything of a personal nature at home, or if they did, I was not supposed to ask questions. It was none of my concern. Children had no business asking questions about adults or the adult world. This was not entirely true, however, as Alice could have conversations with her parents about anything at all. Alice always seemed so wise. She knew so much about the world and how it worked. There were many things that I found utterly incomprehensible, which Alice understood without difficulty. She had insights into the adult world that I lacked entirely. Her parents seemed to want her to understand things. My parents, or my father at least, seemed to want to keep the world a secret from me. My mother tried her best, but what she was prepared to tell me depended on how far she thought she could stretch my father's tolerance. In the cold weather, Alice and I played mainly indoors. Sometimes Mrs. Trevelyan would read to us from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, and I enjoyed these stories. I loved the strange language and the way Lewis Carroll played with words. I loved the idea that lessons were supposed to get shorter all the time and that they were called lessons because they lessened. Alice was extremely fond of these books, especially because they were about a girl called Alice. She thought it was a shame, though, that there was no boy called Vittorio to keep Alice company on her adventures. Alice called me Vittorio because it was Italian. They'd been to Italy on a skiing holiday, and she had mentioned my name to the waiter because he asked her why she looked sad. She said it was because Victor was not there. The waiter answered, "Ah, Vittorio. Vittorio is a good name. Maybe he like Vittorio Giannini." Mrs. Trevelyan told me the part of the story about Vittorio Giannini because Alice couldn't remember his name. Vittorio Giannini was an Italian composer, so I liked the association immensely. I was happier being called Vittorio because maybe I would become a composer. The Trevelyans thought that was amusing and took to calling me Vittorio.